All right, welcome back. Today we're going to do something different. We're going to talk about a book that I recently completed. As you can see, I like to read, and we talk about a lot of books here on Sportscasters Club. But this particular book is one that's been sitting on my shelf for a few years, and I finally decided to pick it up and read it, and I think you're going to enjoy it because it's the perfect book to start a baseball season. And it's called The 1998 Yankees. And the reason I'm sharing this book is because I did not grow up a Yankee fan, even though I did spend 1 year working for the ball club, their minor league team in Norwich, Connecticut, as a broadcaster. But I didn't grow up a Yankee fan. The topic of this book is to determine whether or not the 1998 Yankees were the best team of all time. So let's get into this book. Some of the things I found very interesting, surprising, shocking, and also I'll touch on some of the positives and negatives about this book as well. Came out in 2023. The book was written by Jack Curry, The 1998 Yankees by Jack Curry. And I actually had a chance to talk to Jack Curry a few times 30 years ago when I was a student at WFUV Radio at Fordham University. And Jack was one of the esteemed alumni members who was a beat writer already for the Yankees for the New York Times, and he used to come on the radio program and join us to talk about baseball, which was great. Great guy. I don't think I've ever met him in person, just on the radio show. But this book came out a few years ago, and it's about the 1998 Yankees, and it's really an awesome look because I like his style. What he does is he infuses the day-to-day with the human element. So you learn some of the interesting and fascinating and exciting stories that are going on behind the scenes, not just the wins and losses. Because this 1998 Yankee team, I mean, if anybody remembers, they were stacked. They were stacked. I can remember working at a place called Scorephone in New York City and sitting with a couple of my colleagues there in the spring of 1998. And I remember looking over at one of the guys and I said, honest to God, this is true. I said, this New York Yankee team might be the best team I've ever seen. And he looked at me and he said, oh, you're just a kid, Rick. What do you know about that? Because I was still a college student at the time. I was about to graduate. And here was this Yankee team that was packaged and put together in the spring. And that's what this book talks about. It talks about this Yankee team, how they were compiled, how Brian Cashman and George Steinbrenner assembled the team, and how all the pieces fit together. So really, I really enjoyed reading this book. Here are some of the interesting things that I learned. It spends a lot of time talking about different players, obviously. You'll learn a whole lot about David Wells. A whole lot about David Wells. Some of the stories about David Wells I had heard before. Some I didn't. And I'm not going to give away all the juicy things because I'm going to put a link below so you can go and check out the book for yourself on Amazon. But Jack Curry did a great job getting inside the behind the scenes of David Wells. What he was like, what other teammates thought of him, what he did when he wasn't pitching. An interesting story of an interaction with fans before a game, which was surprising to me that after that particular game he was still thinking about that. Not something I thought he would have been thinking about. So interesting stories like that about David Wells. El Duque, he chronicles El Duque's journey from Cuba and how he came on the scene as a member of the New York Yankees and how he faced that pressure, how he faced those expectations, and how he got along with his teammates. He and David Cohn had a very unique relationship, and it actually played a big part in how he performed on the mound. I'll let you read that for yourself. But very interesting. Brian Cashman, very interesting. This is right at the beginning of Brian Cashman's career. In fact, the book talks about how he was named as the general manager to take over for Bob Watson. And I remember in 2000, so a few years after this, I remember sitting with a baseball scout late after a game one night out at a restaurant. We were leaving the restaurant. It was a scout for a National League team. and we were heading to the cars to go our separate ways. And we ended up standing there in the parking lot talking for like 90 more minutes in the middle of the night, under street lights, under parking lot lights. And we were talking about Brian Cashman and the Yankees. And this scout told me at the time that Brian Cashman was the most prepared general manager he had ever encountered. And this was 2000 that he told me this. And you can see in this book by Jack Curry, you can see where that comes from. You can see how he developed that work ethic and what he was like in 1998, putting together the 1998 Yankees, taking over for Bob Watson. And the Yankees had been a team that already had started winning World Series, but 1998 was different. So I really learned a lot about Brian Cashman, his interactions with George Steinbrenner, how Steinbrenner sat him down and told him that he felt he was ready to be the general manager of the team, taking over, going from assistant to now the general manager. And speaking of Steinbrenner, this book had a lot of very humanizing information about George Steinbrenner. Back there on my shelf, I've got a great biography that came out maybe 5-10 years ago about George Steinbrenner, which was very eye-opening. Always a lot I admired about Steinbrenner. He could obviously become prickly and rub some people the wrong way, but you'll learn some things in this book about the way he treated players and people, and I think you'll find it interesting. I did. So some very interesting stories about George Steinbrenner. In this book, The 1998 Yankees by Jack Curry, there's also stories about clubhouse fights, which surprised me. There was a near bus accident. I'm not going to tell you anymore. A near bus accident. One of the funniest stories from the book was when a player boarded an airplane. He didn't have an ID, so he used his baseball card as an ID and was able to get on the airplane. This was in 1998, so before some of the more strict regulations with flying. So that was an interesting story. What else? Darryl Strawberry was a key member of this team, hit 20-plus home runs for this 1998 Yankees team. And obviously after having a storied start to his career with the Mets, and then falling from grace with his buddy Doc Gooden, off-the-field troubles, drug issues, and Strawberry was making a comeback, and it was really George Steinbrenner that believed in him and brought him back. And it's very interesting to see how on this 98 team, Strawberry was one of the leaders, one of the father figures. I found that very interesting. So much so that Jack Curry even talks about the fact that Strawberry would encourage manager Joe Torre to start other players to let them get some at-bats instead of him. Now, can you imagine the 1986 Darryl Strawberry feeling that way? Very interesting to see that. And then obviously Strawberry he's had quite a life, of a roller coaster even since 1998. But that was very interesting in this book. I also enjoyed in this book learning about how Randy Johnson almost became a Yankee but didn't, and why. Very interesting. Very interesting. And I think Brian Cashman made the right choice in that era for the New York Yankees. And a lot of it came down to fit and chemistry. The fact that they had everything going right. I've always believed chemistry is overrated on a baseball team. But there does seem to be something special about that team where they had everybody pulling in the same direction and willing to do their job without causing a stink about it. And sometimes when you bring in a superstar, that can change that dynamic and that equilibrium. So the Yankees did not bring Randy Johnson to the Bronx. It turned out to be a good thing.
When you're done with this episode, or even if you want to open your browser now, you can go deeper and learn the secrets of sports broadcasting. Search our full list of books at sportscastersclub.com. Available from Amazon and Kindle, paperback, and Audible format.
The team won 125 games, counting the playoffs. One of the stats that really interested me in this book, and again, I'll put the link down below. And again, my name is Rick. Thanks for joining us here. at the Sportscasters Club YouTube program. Make sure to subscribe so you get all our information if you're not already subscribed. And please share with any of your friends and family members that are aspiring sportscasters or sports fans. One of the stats that surprised me in this book, which I had to do a double take and then pull out my phone and start talking to Grok and doing some research to verify. Sorry, Jack, I had to do that. But the New York Yankees in 1998, their starting pitchers threw 22 complete games. 22! That's just astounding to me. Because we're going from an era now where if you see a complete game, it's quite the rarity. In fact, in 1998, the Yankees had 22. In 2025, the Yankees had 0. Big goose egg. 0 complete games in 2025 compared to 22 complete games in 1998. Astounding. David Wells had 8 of them. Andy Pettitte had 5. El Duque and Cone, they each had 3. Hideki Irabu had 2. Amazing. What an amazing pitching staff. The New York Yankees also had the lead. Can you guess how many games the Yankees had the lead in this one streak that they had? They had a number of straight games where they had the lead in every game. How many games? I'll tell you. 48. They had the lead in 48 straight games. Can you believe that? 48 straight games. Let me ask you this question. When the New York Yankees were leading after 8 innings in 1998, how many times did they go on to win? What was their record when they were leading after 8 innings? It might not surprise you because of the best closer ever, Mariano Rivera. And there's some great stuff in this book about Rivera, about Derek Jeter. Some really interesting things about Derek Jeter. I remember seeing Jeter play in 95 when he first came up before he assumed the starting role. That was a magical time. He was roughly my age. He played in the Bronx. I was at Fordham University in the Bronx, so he had quite the personality in New York. But I always admired the fact that he just kept his mouth shut and played and never got into the nonsense and never let himself be on the tabloids, which is quite a thing. Had to respect him for that. Whether or not you think he was an overrated player or not, that's for other people to decide. He's a Hall of Famer. But anyway, back to the question. When leading after 8 innings, the New York Yankees in 1998 were 120-1. They only lost 1 time all year long when leading after 8 innings. 120-1. Unreal. So I really enjoyed this book. A lot about Scott Brocious and what a magical year he had. Shane Spencer the same. Ricky Leday the same. Chuck Knobloch at second base. That infamous brain fart he had where he's pointing down at the ball and it's running loose. Tino Martinez. Jorge Posada. Just fantastic recap from someone who did not grow up as a Yankee fan. But obviously, at that age, I'm a 20-something male. I've got all my buddies who are Yankee fans. We watched so many of those games and went to so many of those games. And then I covered a lot of them in my career as well as a sportscaster and then at WFUV at Fordham. But I can remember, those were magical times for Yankee fans and for baseball fans. So just a team that I really enjoyed this book. But there is one thing that I'll mention that I thought was pretty funny in the book. I disagreed with it. It was there. This book is very difficult to nitpick, but I've got to find something. My broadcast partner, Bill Rogan, used to say that praise without criticism is hollow. So in other words, you want to be balanced. So I did pick one thing that I'm going to throw out here that I'll pick as a negative for the book. 1998, he was talking about the home run derby between Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa that was going on during the season. I can remember broadcasting at the time. And I can remember broadcasting in the minor leagues, and fans would come up and say, McGwire hit another one tonight. Or then they'd come up and say, Sosa hit another. They went back and forth all season long. And everybody knew they were juicing. Everybody knew. The players knew. They talked about it. Before, we would talk all the time about it. They said, yeah, of course, these guys are juicing. This was during the juice era of baseball. And this was before it got thrown out into the open. McGwire later admitted it. Sosa didn't. But it was laughable to me because in the book, Jack Curry said, and I wrote the quote down here. He said, Sosa and McGwire were competing back and forth wholesomely and cordially. Wholesomely and cordially. It made me laugh. It made me laugh. But be that as it may, if that's the only nitpick I can find in the book, fantastic. Excellent book by Jack Curry. The 1998 Yankees. I think you'll enjoy it. It's really fun and light. You'll learn a lot. And even if you're just a baseball fan, not even just a Yankee fan, you're going to find this book amusing, entertaining, enlightening. I mean, I love to read baseball books because I've written a bunch of them as well. But obviously nothing like Jack Curry's The 1998 Yankees. So I'll put the link below. Check it out. Let me know what you think of this book. And if you have any books you'd like me to review, shoot me a comment. And if you have any thoughts about this as well, leave a comment below. Again, make sure to subscribe to the show. And again, my name is Rick. Thanks for joining us today. It's been a pleasure talking Yankee baseball, talking baseball in general. And until next time, so long.